month. What is next month? August? August High Lecture. We're really excited because Christian Kopich, who is the curator at the Yellowstone County Museum up at the airport, they just redid their entire firearms exhibit, and he's going to be joining us and sharing about the Winchester rifle, the making of an American icon, of a Western icon. And I'm really excited about that presentation too. He really knows what he's talking about, and I think it's going to be a great piece for us. But all of that is exciting, but not as exciting as our presentation today. We are joined by Melody Dobson. Melody served as a signature event coordinator for the National Lewis and Clark Bicentennial's Clark on the Yellowstone signature event. That is a really big tongue twister. And of course, the National Day of Honor from 2004 to 2007. The events commemorated the 200th anniversary of Captain William Clark signing his name at the Pompei's Pillar. Melody served as a member of the Pompei's Pillar Historical Association Board of Directors and was inducted on October 1st, 2016 into the Honor Garden for her dedication to the development and preservation of that monument. We at the Western Heritage Center work very closely with Pompei's Pillar and are always very honored to be joined by somebody dedicated to that site as well. Melody comes from a fourth-generation farm and ranch in northeastern Montana and raised her 4 children, Sheldon, Christopher, Scott, and Elizabeth. Bless Elizabeth as the only girl, with her late husband, Terry Dobson in Billings. She has experience in network radio, on-air management, and as a personality and news director, as well as in sales. She received her bachelor's degree in communication arts from Montana State University Billings, which was formerly, of course, Eastern Montana College. I'm really excited for her presentation today. She's got a little bit of everything, and she also has some special gifts for us, which I'm really stoked for you to be able to take part in as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Melody, and I'm going to shift over to my other duty today.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, and I can't say thank you enough for this beautiful place. And my first thank you, of course, is to you folks here at Western Heritage Center for what you're doing, and hey, especially providing this nice, cool atmosphere for us today. You know, I think that's kind of fun to have that. Before we start, my colleague and co-partner in this project called the American Doorstop Project is Jody Lamp. And she is in Ashland, Nebraska, near Lincoln right now, watching online. And she and I have worked collaboratively together since 2012, and especially in the American Doorstop Project since 2015. But anyway, together, she and I would like to thank a few people quickly, and that is Barb Skelton of the Hardin Brook Ranch. Barb and husband Paul have the Intermountain Equestrian facility on your way up to Broadview. Barb helps out the American Doorstop Project so well, and her family is featured in the book as well, in our Montana book. Kevin Kelly of Kelly Bean Company, we share his story in the Kelly Bean story in our Nebraska book, as well as the Montana book, as they have a plant down by Bridger and all the way on the Yellowstone Valley up to Terry. They grow about 6,000 acres of pinto beans in this area. And 21st Century John Deere, Owen Palm and his crew have always been gracious and hospitable to Jody and I. We share offices in Montana as well as in Nebraska. And we have the Montana History Foundation, has always supported us since 2014, guided us through and been a fiscal sponsor and just a good voice of reason when we've needed it. Also for the Montana Project, Stockman Bank, they really helped help us with images and coming through with some of our research. And traveling the state of Montana is kind of big, just so you know. So research time took a while. And for our book tour today, I always have to thank Montana Agri-Women, who are advocating for agriculture all the time, and we appreciate them. Town and Country Supply Association, they're a great cooperative here in the Yellowstone Valley. The folks said, well, you're gonna need some gas as you tour around, so that was very helpful. And one that's very fun for us is Big Red Popcorn. Nebraska is the #1 state for growing popcorn. So they have graciously said, we'll be one of your road tour sponsors. And then Shelley Mann and the folks up at Boot Hill Inn, they're always gracious to us too. Those are the folks helping us make sure that we can get here on time and in full force. I thought at this particular time, since Jody's not here, it would be good for me to, I asked earlier if we could show our 5-minute video to learn more about what the American Doorstop Project does. And you're gonna learn, you're gonna recognize some folks in there too, but you'll have a greater understanding. So enjoy this video. This is where it all began. Welcome to the American Doorstop Project,
where we share the untold and forgotten stories of American agriculture history. Today we're at the base of the Scottsbluff National Monument in the Panhandle of Nebraska. In fact, I was born and raised right here in Scottsbluff County.
Join us as we work to research and bring these stories to life.
Jody Lamp and Melody Dobson are co-founders and directors of the American Doorstop Project. The doorstop is a visual icon representing the open door to America's agriculture archives, so worthy of commemoration. This educational project spotlights agriculture history through books, videos, and live events. Our goal is to preserve and protect the stories found in our landmarks. Lamp and Dobson signed a multiple book publishing agreement with the History Press, beginning with A History of Nebraska Agriculture, A Life Worth Living, released in June of 2017. This book highlights more than a century and a half of agriculture industry, inventions, and innovations in the Cornhusker State. Homesteading families share their stories about the state's top commodities, the development of irrigation, and the world's largest horse sale. The book is illustrated with paintings by renowned Nebraska artist Jean Ronka.
I think the American Doorstop Project is important because of the fact that if somebody doesn't preserve that history and write it down so that people can read it, it'll be lost. The history of his paintings and the history of the book go together well.
People like the fact that there is something very moving in that for them. I think that's wonderful because it brings back yesterday's life.
The series will continue with books about agriculture in Montana, North Dakota, and the Legacy Project, with stories from throughout the country.
Well, I think ag history, especially here in Montana, is very, very important. It's the farmers and ranchers that provide the food and fiber to feed the rest of the nation. And agriculture is our #1 industry here in Montana.
If we don't continue to preserve the history of Montana agriculture, we forget the base that brought the driver for the economy of Montana.
The progression of agriculture from the east to the west began with our nation's first agrarians, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, and James Madison. As Jefferson said in 1787, agriculture is our wisest pursuit because it will in the end contribute most to real wealth, good morals, and happiness. Our stories preserve the narrative of homesteading families, honoring the legacies of our past, before generations removed from the family farm forget their ancestral roots.
The book, A History of Nebraska Agriculture, gives the opportunity for us to honor those who have been here before us, the pioneers who came through this desolate country that is now our home. They fought through famine, they fought through disease, and they fought through Indian wars, if you will, finding a new territory. And it's so important for us to remember them and their hardships and to appreciate our legacy.
From reading the book, the parts that impacted me the most were probably stories that related to our local area here, the tremendous success of the Lockwood family and the potato equipment business, and especially the irrigation and projects that were started over 100 years ago that are still in use today.
How many people in America don't realize that agriculture plays such a significant economic driver in their community? We want them to understand that maybe their community wouldn't even exist if the people that came before them hadn't developed their with agriculture.
Agriculture is something that allows us to look at something that every one of us is connected to. I have an agriculture background. I come from a fourth generation farm and ranch where I have homesteading grandparents and saw firsthand what everybody did to make that farm happen. I respect their hard work, I love what they do, and I love that there's a legacy to continue.
So what we want people to do is know that they can help us and help you leave a legacy for your family through the American Doorstop Project. Tell us your story, but we also need your financial support and your archival support. We need your pictures, we need your videos, we just need your blessing too.
We need your help.
Contact us to be a part of the American Doorstop Project.
And just a quick reminder for myself to thank everybody who's joining us online. I know Jody's online watching too. So appreciate the time I have with you. We're going to travel the state of Montana in some very unique directions to highlight some benchmarks that were important to our entire development of agriculture as it relates to production agriculture. What does that mean? When did that seed or animal become available for market to feed a family member, to feed a neighbor, to feed a city, a community? So that's the road we're going to travel today, and I'm going to highlight some things for you that you may know, may have forgotten, and may enjoy knowing about again. As we chose the stories and the narratives that were placed in the book, of course you're working with editors, and so on one day I had to let 10,000 words go, Jody and I did, as well as some images, so we couldn't tell every story, but we told stories that we feel like everybody can relate to, that give us, and sorry about that, that give us a clearer picture of when things started. So I wanted to go with you over to western Montana. September 24th, 1841 would be called Founders Day, and that's when Father DeSmit arrived on invitation to the area of Stevensville to start the St. Mary's Mission. And that's where we can find ourselves putting our finger on where agriculture being planted, being put in the ground, or animals coming for nutrition and food. That's a place. We call it the founding of Montana, and the date would be September 24th, 1841. What promoted so much of the agriculture development in Montana would be the mining that came. The miners needed food. So one of the things that was very apparent that they needed to get food immediately to the different cities that were popping up. And what was going south of Montana was the Oregon Trail. So many of those animals would come, they'd be weary and wore out on the trail, and they'd barter for those animals, bring them up to the beautiful Beaverhead and the Deer Lodge area, and that's where a lot of our cattle progression and production developed out of that area. Of course, we're well known in Montana for the cattle drives. So we can say from about 1864, when we have all of our mining starting, that's when we have the cattle era beginning. And I'm going to talk about 3 events in Montana that were very, very significant. They were 3 booms in busts in Montana. Cattle, the Great Die-Up, which there were so many cattle then that developed. They brought cattle, the cattle drives that we've heard about in history books. The cattle drives came up to Montana where it was open range. And by 1886, the grasslands that were available were overgrazed, and the weather that they thought was so promising was not. It became severe. 1886, it was that fall. They had the signs of a tough already drought had hit the area, and the blizzard started. And one of our great folks that documented this area was a gentleman who was the manager of a ranch up by Fort McGinnis, in that Lewistown Judith Gap area. He was the manager for the DHS ranch. And the DHS ranch, he documented in December the blizzards started. He went out, and by the time the blizzards and the snow and the cold stopped, later that in a few months, 75% of the cattle had been lost on most of the bigger and larger ranches. And Granville Stewart said at that particular point, I never wanted to own an animal that I could not feed or care for. What came out of that was range management. Also, the Montana Stock Growers was were created around that time too. So we had some new things that were developing. Barbed wire was coming in, and homesteading was also started. Homesteading started in the early 1860s and had been moving towards Montana. The development of agriculture really took place when we had roads to get from one community to the other. A benchmark and something to really remember is the Mullen Road. How did they get to the one community to the next? And when the Mullen Road came in, before that we had the steamships getting goods and services to Fort Benton on the Missouri. And from the Missouri to all the way to Walla Walla, Washington, then we had a new military road that was created. So in this journey of production agriculture, I want to go back to another boom that happened in western Montana. And I don't know if any of you have ever thought of Montana being known as one of the biggest apple producing states. You know, we think about Washington, we think about the other areas, but I'll just read a little bit how when production agriculture became full swing. Growing food was well underway in the new Montana Territory by 1866. With an immigrant population to feed, many who came searching for gold had by now committed themselves to farming and ranching ventures. They made more money by farming and ranching than they did in the mining fields. Attention was on variable products that could survive. Here was the big deal in Montana. It had to survive climate and weather to successfully make it to the markets in time to realize a profit. They'd have a beautiful crop and the frost would hit. And that was a difficult thing, especially in the Bozeman Valley. But the Bitterroot Valley, south of Missoula, is where our first farmer is recorded. His name was Thomas Harris. He farmed the first field that was harvested. It was a field of oats in about 1866, between 1864 and 1866, and then he went on his own in 1866. So we call Thomas Harris our first Montana farmer. He actually came from Woodford County in Kentucky out to Montana. As Bitterroot Valley grew, others soon followed Thomas Harris in developing their own farms, primarily producing wheat, oats, and barley. And then we had the St. Mary's Mission was still up and running, and Father Ravalli was the priest that was there, who was very, very progressive in bringing new techniques to that area. And you can go there. He was the one to plant the first apple trees. So if you go to St. Mary's Mission, in 2016, it was still alive, the apple tree that he planted. And then we moved on to Thomas Harris planting one of the first orchards. And I love this in the research. I was able to discover this. From a Washington-based salesman, Thomas purchased 100 apple plants, 4 plum, and 2 pear trees, as well as 12 raspberry and 50 strawberry plants for his first orchard planting. And soon from that, they could tell that the orchards thrived and survived. And it was about 10, maybe by 1865 and 1877, in that period of time, the growth was so prominent that there was the Bass Brothers. If you're up in that area, just when you go right out of Missoula and you're headed down to Stevensville, and there is on US 93, I believe it is, right? And if you get really there's the Bass Creek. You take a trail and you can kind of see this whole area. But these two guys, they were brothers, the Bass brothers, and that's where the Bass Creek is named after them. Dudley and Edward, they arrived in Stevensville, the new town next to St. Mary's Mission and Fort Owen. 5 years later, in 1870, the duo challenged the critics and planted the first successful commercial orchard on the West Bench lands and called it Pine Grove Fruit Farm. And by 1880, they were able to send food over to Butte, to the mining area. And believe it or not, they held a fruit fair in 1883. But they kept on progressing. They brought a spur line on the Northern Pacific Railroad, and they brought it down into Hamilton because they were growing so many apples and so many people were doing orchards. It was the Bitterroot Railroad Company. And we have, by 1896, there was a Bitterroot Orchard Company. They were the largest apple orchard in the world. And they had over 40,000 trees on 380 acres. And by 1907, they were shipping 250 boxcar loads of apples out in 150,000 wooden boxes. Most of them were Macintosh apples. And then by 1921, the growers were loading 637 boxcars. They had boxcars going out and that were shipping out by rail, and it was known as they were known worldwide for the Macintosh apple. So now you have a stable, a reliable income for the apples, and they had other berries. They had just put in a full irrigation system not too many years before. Things were looking good, but then by 1922 and 1923, they had killing frosts and hail, and it decimated the orchards. They could never recover again. The legacy of the Macintosh apple and the apple orchards of that area is celebrated the first Saturday of every October at Apple Day in Hamilton. So what a long legacy. And in honor of that, I went to the store. I could not find Macintosh apples anywhere, but I bought Gala apples. I washed them and wrapped them up. So today, if you want to grab yourself an apple, think about the days over in the beautiful Bitterroot Valley. And can you imagine the whole entire valley in the springtime with all those blooms and all those orchards? And to be known in the world as the largest orchards. That just amazes me. So we'll leave the western part of the state and we'll come back to this area, and I want to focus a little bit up north in the Missouri River country. As the railroads were developing and coming in, so was homesteading in a very large scale manner. Advertising was being done throughout the world. To come, you could literally grow overnight and you could be successful. So we have we had the cattle boom, we had the apple boom. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the homesteading boom. When Jody and I were asked to write, our publisher is the History Press, which is owned by Arcadia Publishing. If you go out to Barnes & Noble or someplace, you'll see those sepia tone books that have all sorts of postcards, and that's the company that that is publishing our work. They asked us if we would write state ag history connected to our homesteading roots. That's Nebraska, Montana, and North Dakota, and we're working right now on North Dakota. And then we'll continue on our national work, and we'll share a little bit about that in the middle. But as we were doing our Nebraska work, we were able to really put our finger on the world of homesteading, as the Homesteading Act came out in 1862, and the Homestead Monument is down by Beatrice, Nebraska. If you're traveling south, make sure you stop there. It's just a beautiful, beautiful place. And also, as a Union Pacific Railroad came in, there was also the the railroad markets came in, the markets for cattle, horse markets. Excuse me, in the Nebraska book, we begin the story of the Grand Island Horse and Mule Market. Jody did a tremendous amount of research on that. But in 1924, it was the world's largest and horse and mule market. And the gentleman who helped co-found that is the gentleman who came out and founded Billings Livestock Commission. And he opened that up around 1934. And what he started, his name is Art Langman. What he started then continues today. But we started the homestead stories in the Nebraska book, and we continue them through here. And History Press wanted us to have a connection to that homestead history. Jody's family is out of northwestern Nebraska. My family hails in northeastern Montana. Anybody know where Circle is and Vida? We're in the, there's a little road, gravel, it's now paved, part of it is. 201 runs from Highway 13 over to Fairview. And we grew up south of, in Macomb County, south of Wolf Point. And if you were on 201, if you were on that road, you went to high school in Wolf Point. If you were Vida and south, you went to school in Circle. So I'm a Wolf Point kid. And Wolf Point was a very, very strategic community for agriculture in the sense of providing the seeds to plant, transportation, and for everybody to bring their harvest into. One of the things was the Missouri River kind of was a divide. They had a pretty good ferry system, but people were shouting loudly in the 30s when the bridge over on Highway 13 went finally across the river. Bridges were big. Just think about this, transportation. All roads lead to distribution, so getting your goods to there. But homesteading was it seemed like the perfect solution for those who didn't have a solution. So they said goodbye to their relatives all over the world and headed for the United States, and especially for these North Dakota, Montana, South Dakota, Nebraska, and these areas that were providing homesteading. And there's a fun story to share about it, to give you a little insight. It wasn't all what is cracked up to be when they got here. There's a gentleman who took the time to record his thoughts and his daily activities. His name was Milburn Lincoln Wilson, and he was known as M.L. Wilson. And he was the Undersecretary of the U.S. Department of Agriculture in 1937 to 1940, and he helped with the New Deal that came in under Franklin D. Roosevelt and Harry Truman. So we get a really good picture and understanding of the homesteading. And this gentleman, my roots are up on the Missouri River. He was down by Fallon on the Yellowstone River. ML says, homesteading was a speculative move. Wilson spent a year calculating his decision, planning, preparing, and finally selling his 240-acre successful livestock operation in eastern Nebraska. He graduated in 1906 from the School of Agriculture at Iowa State in Ames, Iowa, where he majored in agronomy, the predecessor of modern farm management. After traveling to Miles City to file his claim with the Federal Land Office and waiting in line for several days, his view of homesteading was altered forever. Wilson wondered if homesteaders had a place in rational agricultural development. The hotels were overflowing, and Wilson spent his nights on a makeshift cot in a large room jammed with seekers. Teachers, laborers, miners, lawyers, even gamblers and dance hall girls rushed to get some of the available land. The one belief they all shared was that they could make fast money. Having read glowing stories in hometown newspapers, railroad flyers, and even the Saturday Evening Post, they had stormed into Miles City for their share of the anticipated windfall. With determination and confidence in his professional training in agriculture, agronomy, and management, Wilson took on the challenge of farming the plains. He now had his own claim a land partnership he arranged while still living in Nebraska, but the weather and nature were against him, and the venture failed. It was the time in the season not long after the rain stopped, especially in 1917. We had beautiful crops leading up to it. They had beautiful crops, and there was this one factor that also was very difficult on them, was the Great White Combine. Does anybody know what the Great White Combine was? Hailstorms. The hailstorms following by the grasshoppers, but the rain stopped in 1917, is in the spring, and it made it very, very difficult. The population in this period of the homesteading season, the population in Montana by 1918 had tripled in less than, it was a 20-year period leading up to it, was 769,000 people over it. The rain stopped in 1917, and by 1922 in that area, 60,000 people exited the state. Their hopes were dashed. The Homestead Act, signed by President Abraham Lincoln in 1862, gave away over 10% of the United States land for free in exchange for a person's commitment to a portion of land identified as a claim and proving he or she could work the parcel for 3 to 5 years. Montana led the way in proving up 151,600 homesteads, the most in the nation, while North Dakota reported 118,472, Colorado had 107,618, Nebraska was fourth at 104,260 homesteads. What a period of time, and I also, Jody and I have to thank our persevering relatives for the ability to hang in there. And we have now in our farm and ranch area in northeastern Montana, we have 5th generation kids, fourth and fifth generation. The 4th generation, I have 5 and 6 nieces and nephews still working in ag. It's either ag business, ag communications, or on the farm itself. My brothers, I grew up on the homestead, on Grandpa and Grandma's homestead. Then my mom and dad lived there. My brother took over Grandma's home, and then my nephew is now living in my parents' house, and he's doing well. They're doing well up there. Talked to my brother a week ago, and he says, we're getting these nice rains. We haven't got any hail. So, you know, and I don't know about you guys, but I kind of watched the highway to see if the custom combiners are going to head this way pretty quick. I think harvest is going to be on in about a week. And with that in mind, I wanted to show you something for that area. Wolf Point had several of the elevator systems for there. It was just on the railroad, and in a particular point in time, if you can think of the northeastern Montana map, you know, the highway can go north to Canada, and then go south all the way, connect you many directions, and you got east and west highway too. So you really had a lot of terminals there, even a lot of grain elevators. And this is a flour sack I was able to rescue, and I'll put it right here. I think you might, I don't know, let me hold it. What that area was known for, and I might just pass it around, was high protein wheat. And if you talk to any of the folks at farm and ranch, especially growers up by Leicester, north of, in that Glasgow area, in that area, they'll say to this day, even with the new pulse crops coming in, they'll say wheat is king. But it was that area, sorry about that, is known for its high protein, all the way over to Malta and that. But I love the name they came up with, the Glacier Till. That was the Glacier Trail. So anyway, I'll pass it around just for fun, and you can, I told them not to go in front of that. So it'll make noise. Do you want to come grab that and just pass it around for me? That was my grandmother's. I was happy to find it. Those were the 3 events that were very impactful in the development, the booms and busts. But out of that, trials, tribulations, and triumphs, we have a a state that is one of the #1 egg producing states for the United States. Out of that, there were, I'll just see if anybody can think about this. There were 2 events in agriculture that were so impactful, we call them major events, and they changed the way agriculture continued to today. Can anybody think of 2 events? Dirty 30s? And in the dirty 30s, there's something that happened that lit up the world. Electrification. Rural electrification changed everything. And the person that picked up the bandwagon for that was Teddy Roosevelt, who was convinced that you cannot have a city that's lit up and a farm that's not. Because with electrification, you can do chores later in the hour. Hydraulic power. You were able to multiply your efforts, and maximizing time was everything you could do. And the other thing that came about that allowed for most farms to be, and ranchers to be able to get a leg up is when we said goodbye to horsepower and welcomed another horsepower. When the small tractor came in, when the engine came in. And you think about this. If you were able to get a tractor, then you did not have to have all those acres for the growing of hay to feed your natural tractor. So that's a rural electrification. Came in with the Rural Electrification Act in 1936, allowing the states to create cooperatives. And if you go throughout Montana, you will meet several of the folks that serve on boards for cooperatives. Those cooperatives were designed to help bring electricity to the communities, but they were also built with a honor guard, let's just call it an honor guard, to help their communities thrive and grow. And we can name Yellowstone Valley Electric Cooperative, what it does for the community. Town and Country provides the inputs and the outputs for the fields. So up in northeastern Montana, it's Niemont. And when COVID hit, think about this. Again, the reality of not every community has communication up there, and everybody was going to school online. They were able to get computers, they were able to help people get online as quickly. And right now, that is a threat and a concern for all of agriculture right now, because so many use the global system, mapping system, the GPS systems in their agriculture, and a lot of them can have computer activity in their home and in their shop, and the second they leave to head out to the fields, they lose service, and they need it so desperately these days. But they're working, they're working on it, and that makes it happen, so nice. And then, so we have these major events, the 2 events that are, you can talk to, I did a interview with Ed Lenhart. He's since passed, this past spring. He was 93, and I asked Ed he farmed and ranched out in west here of Billings, and I said, what was the biggest thing that ever happened to you in your agriculture? You remember? He goes, 1937, just like that. He just jumped up, said, when we got lights on the farm. So I appreciated that. And almost anybody that I can talk to says that's one of the big events. There's Nicholas Schumann, who is the grandfather of a good friend, Lori Platt, and he and his wife, when we got electricity, Nick came into town, and she said to him, don't you dare come home if you're gonna get a tractor, you make sure there's an electric wash machine on there, so that was, but of course, any story is, we could talk about events all day long, but what is most important is the people. And Yellowstone Valley has legacies of so many folks that really helped us in our development. And I'd like to give a shout out to two people, just because I only have time to focus on a couple. And one of them is Thomas and Mary Kent. And I have two great-granddaughters of Thomas Kent here that showed up just before the talk, and I appreciate you so much. And Thomas Kent freighted all the time, and he came to Montana out of, they said he grew up mainly kind of in the Iowa area, and he loved his horses and his wagons, and he was a freighter. But he freighted out of down by Nebraska City and brought goods all the way to Virginia City in 1864, and was able to do a little bit of everything, but he did make some money in the mine field, which allowed him to think through the cattle business and the sheep business. And I won't continue too lengthy into his story, but the beautiful thing about him is that he helped develop, when you're on your way to Big Timber, there's the Bridger Creek exit, and their farm and ranch. It's basically the ranch that's there. But he, from 1864 all the way up to the 1880s, he was able to bring the sheep industry, so many different things he did, from all the way from, let's just say all the way from Livingston, Big Timber, all the way down, through relatives and that, all the way down to Lodge Grass and to the Wyoming border. He married Mary Whiteshield. She was the daughter of a Crow chief, and together they created a beautiful ranching lifestyle and farming. And then they had 5 daughters, and those 5 daughters kept their families in this area true. And from there, their legacy is farming and ranching. And if you recognize, I know one name is Stovall, that's the Stovall legacy. The other is, in 2016 in October, I got to interview Booz Stevens, who would have been a great-grandson of Thomas Kent. Just very knowledgeable, great stories. We laughed, and he was on spot for everything. Boo just passed away about a month ago, I believe, and I was invited in 2017 to go to a family picnic over by Bridger Creek, where the family cemetery is. But I will always appreciate that day to have learned about so many of them. And then Turk Stovall, one of the great-grandson. Two greats? Two greats, okay, Turk. He gave me a tour. Started early in the morning. It was a nice December day. He didn't stop talking until about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We drove miles and miles, and he was just showing me, and his love for livestock and his appreciation for his great-grandparents was evident. And so that's some of the fun things that we get to do when we're doing our stories. And then another gentleman who I'd like to give credit to, and so again, thanks for Thomas and Mary Kent. They had a 2-story, one of the first 2-story wooden frame houses that was was very, very close to the interstate there. And maybe a few years ago, within a decade, that there was a fire.
No, 1922.
The fire on the 2-story building?
October of 1922.
Okay, all right. I thought it was much earlier than that, but to their good credit, I wanted to read. They built not only a home, they built a community, and it was recorded, I believe, I'm not sure what the Big Timber, I think I have it marked here. I do want to read this to you, because I thought it was so, to have the first 2-frame house that stood there forever was fun. That was Turk. Let's see. Bear with me 1 second. On the house. Okay. This was written of his ranching legacy. Besides being the oldest pioneer of the Yellowstone who has made a part of that wonderful and historic valley his home, having been identified in paving the way for its civilization at the early year of 1864, Mr. Kent also retains the distinction of having the finest ranch residence as well as the best and costliest furnishings of any throughout the length and breadth of its domain. Furthermore, his home residence is the first frame dwelling that ever graced the valley. It is made the more homelike and comfortable, by its orchards of apples, plums, cherries, and all varieties of small fruits, while to his comfort added an amiable wife and helpmate and 5 children. Possessing the above noteworthy attainments, the Kent home is the only true relic of pioneer days in which the latch string is always on the outside. For like those good old frontier days, none were barred from entrance to their door. Consequently, this venerable couple today recognize no enemies, treating alike rich and poor, high and low, it matters not who. I thought that was very neat. That came out of the Big Timber Pioneer newspaper, stated in 1903. Another gentleman I'd like to just share a quick shout out to would be I.D. O'Donnell. And I wanted to kind of close with his legacy. And I'm gonna, may I just, I wanted to pass these on and take one. I wanted to do something a little bit different than a PowerPoint today. But I.D. O'Donnell is a gentleman who graced this valley with his time, talent, and treasure. And this is his picture, and this is for you to take home. And one of the things that he did for us was provide places where we could go and learn about history. This was a library once upon a time, and he's the one that helped develop it. But I.D. O'Donnell came to Montana. How I honored him in our Montana Ag book, I honored him in the fact that he was America's first and only supervisor of irrigation. This area is beautiful because down 20 miles, we have the irrigation project, which is known today as the Huntley Irrigation Project. ID had a sixth sense coming from the Saginaw, Michigan area about irrigation. So as a young 20-some-year-old gentleman arriving in Montana in 1882, the railroad quit in Miles City. He stopped, he went up and tried to do he tried to do a little bit of mining up in Maiden, up by Lewistown area, and then he came back to Billings. And what I did is I just kind of highlighted for you what this gentleman did for us. And on this particular day that Western Heritage Center said, would you come and join us? I wanted to honor somebody who is in our valley who did so much. He had the Hesper Farm, which is some of the highlights, which was on the western part of like 72nd Street in that area, over by the Yellowstone Boys and Girls Ranch, was a demonstration farm. ID knew that you had to train farmers and ranchers how to grow and go. So in 1912, 1913, after our irrigation our irrigation project was developed, funding was going to be taken away. And ID worked and believed in irrigation projects all the way west of the Mississippi for the whole United States. But Washington was going to start removing some of that funding, and he raised his hand and said no, because you have to teach these people how to grow yet. So they said, okay, you get to be the supervisor of irrigation for America. You go and teach them, and he did that a lot. He served from about 1913 to 1919. He was on the social invitation list of 4 American presidents through his tenure. In 1899, he brought the National Irrigation Congress to Montana, but he also, you just about can't go anywhere in the whole entire city and not see his footprint or his handprint. And to honor him in a unique way, he was very involved in building planting our trees, birds, flowers, plants, horticulture. And if you go to South Park, North Park, you see those big, beautiful trees. They're because of him, he planted, I packed up some bird seed. So if you guys want to, in honor of ID, so if you want to go and spread some bird seed, and there's a pack for each couple or family, and just to think about as you're traveling, he and his family in the 1905-06 year built that beautiful home at 105 Clark Avenue. He was very good friends of P.B. Moss. I have a fun picture of ID's 80th birthday, and P.B. Moss is in the, he's the second to the left, and ID's right in the middle, here he's at 80. So that was taken in, it was his birthday party at his home. It was September of 1942. So, but ID gives us a legacy that we can see how agriculture grew from learning. He knew that people had to have education on how to use the product. He was the first one to plant alfalfa. He was also known as the Alfalfa King in the state. He helped, if a new piece of equipment was coming in to be used, he helped create demonstrations. There is a research station outside of the town of Huntley in that area. He was very responsible in helping get the first director. And I have a list of the first equipment that were there. And in the communities that as they were developing, they had to learn how to manage and mitigate the weather. They had to come together in so many areas. The Montana book is dedicated to a cooperative effort. The Nebraska book, we share more that we believe that water is to Nebraska what cooperatives are to Montana. And that's kind of the theme that runs within the book. But so share with your family some of the highlights of ID, and when you're running around town, just take a look and go, oh, that's where ID did that. And so it's quite a story. And we can, if you take a few minutes and come over here, ID was a very good friend of Parmalee Billings. And the two of them, it's a great story, and it's all right here. And it's in the Western Heritage Center. And I love the Western Heritage Center because it tells the whole stories of the whole valley. But to conclude my day here with you and my time, I would be remiss if I did not give a shout out for Pompei's Pillar National Monument. Two gentlemen started a journey out of, under the guidance and tutoring of Thomas Jefferson. And on April 7th, 1805, I'm talking about Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, but when they were at the Mandan Village, in outside of the Bismarck area. They were getting ready to head west on their journey. And Lewis took the time to sit down and write a letter and pen this letter and send it back on the keel boat. Not everybody went west, some went back with the artifacts that they'd found. So he wrote on April 7th, 1805, he wrote, "On our return trip, we shall probably pass down the Yellowstone region, which waters one of the fairest portions of the continent." So on the trip back in 1806, Clark and several members of the party, Lewis went north towards the Missouri, and Clark brought a few of the party this way. And on July 25th, 1806, he ascended a sandstone butte. Monday is the anniversary, the 216th anniversary of Clark ascending the pillar. When he got to the top, he saw wildlife every direction as far as he could see. He had commented earlier in the journals when he was back west some on the great opportunities for agriculture there that was available. So I just, I call those gentlemen the folks that came out first to figure out where to go and grow. And we have the legacy of the Lewis and Clark expedition right here at Pompei's Pillar National Monument, as it was Clark that's carved his name and left the only physical evidence of the trail. But fast forward 100 years, by that time in 1906 was irrigation and agriculture was coming in right then. So take a drive down just 28 miles, start here and go all the way and take the loop and see the beautiful agriculture of the Yellowstone Valley. Thank you for your time, and if there's any questions, I'd love to answer comments too. Make sure you come get an apple and some birdseed.
Thank you.
Oh, this is the only I wanted to, for the Thomas Kent story I wanted to show. I wasn't going to pass this around. I was going to show this is the shear. Could you imagine? Thousands of sheep being sheared with this. I'm going, my hand would. So come on up and take a stand. But here's the bird seed and I do have some books in the back, and Jody and we have some Nebraska books, some Montana books, and a little documentary film we did as well. So,
Any questions?